I'm joined today by Sinead Laverty, the Senior Client Partner and eWill Speaker. Sinead, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, I've been here with LHH for a good 7-8 years, and this Women in Leadership program I actually experienced myself around 6 years ago, and since then have been a huge advocate for. So delighted to be here alongside Sarah supporting this content today.
Thanks so much, Sinead, and we'll be hearing a good bit from Sinead today, which is great. One of the things we are often asked is why have development programs for women, and what our research and data, from our research and data, we know that women face headwinds and challenges that make it more difficult to progress to senior level. So our Women in Leadership program is based on these specific areas relevant for women to enable them to thrive within their chosen careers. So let me give a quick recap in case this is the first session that you are joining today. And we have been offering 4 taster sessions. Our first one was on career activism. The second one was on strengthening confidence and resilience. The third one was on leading with impact and brand. And today we're focusing on adding strategic value. So we're going to take you through how we deliver our eWill programs and give you as much insight on development as we can in 50 minutes or so. If you're thinking about your own development, we've created a worksheet for you to reflect on after the session, which has been sent out and will also be posted in the chat. For those joining for your own development, we recommend you find a buddy to talk through what comes up for you in these sessions. And we do this on our programs, and we facilitate this for you to have conversations about your insights and learning. And this session today is being run on a webinar format. So it's not our virtual learning platform, which is fully interactive. We won't have breakouts and whiteboards, but we will be interacting with you via the chat and polls. And if you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A as we go along. And we'll have about 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So let's remind ourselves of where we are in the program. So if this was a program for first line or middle leaders, we would usually finish it after 3 modules. But if it is for upper, middle and senior leaders, we have this additional adding strategic value session. So we are coming to the end of our program, and before this session you would have attended a discovery session, and this is an opportunity to share successes and actions taken since the last workshop. So I know it's only been a week, and if anybody here has been on any of the workshops over the last number of weeks or even last week, please feel free to share anything you've learned in the chat. If you're on our personal brand workshop last week, if you'd like to share, have you shared any of your achievements confidently or increased your impact by perhaps not over apologizing or not brushing off that positive feedback, everything that we spoke about last week. And secondly, these discovery sessions are an opportunity to bring specific personal challenges to the topics for group support. And really, by the time we are getting to these final discovery sessions, we would be really encouraging the group to be facilitating these themselves so they can continue to run small group coaching sessions when the programs finally finish. And this is really all about sustaining learning. So today for this taster, we're going to be focusing on adding strategic value. So let's go. So we start off by focusing on some of the possible headwinds to adding strategic value, then looking at your current focus and how you add value, including saying no, and then how we can increase the visibility of our strategic thinking by how we communicate. And research has shown that women can be perceived as less strategic, not necessarily because the capability is lacking, but because some things get in the way, such as what we pay attention to, where we focus our time, how we communicate, and how we build strategic relationships. So just think for a second whether it's always you who pick up the action points in the meetings whilst others sit back. We may think we're being helpful, but consciously or unconsciously we're taking the role of doer, order taker, and executor. And it can perpetuate being trapped in the weeds while leaving time for others to move on more strategic activities. And over time, this can lead to false perceptions that women are best at executing, adept at the details, and essential to keeping the ship running, rather than having the strategic capability to think longer term, contribute to the big ideas, or influence the stakeholders needed for success. And of course, we all know that that simply isn't the case. And another headwind that women face around this issue is how we're raised and socialized. So we may grow up believing that a good team player pitches in and helps, a good team player says yes, not no. And sometimes it can be hard not to swoop in and take over and take on admin work when no one else is speaking up or when things are not done to our standards. So today, we'd like you to think about, do you add your full strategic value? Is the daily whirlwind sucking you into a tactical frenzy with little time to look out onto the horizon? So this session is time really to reevaluate your true value and how you refocus your efforts. And we start the workshop off with, of course, a welcome back. And the first thing I'd like us all to be thinking about is, what does strategic mean in your organization? So what we find is it can mean different things in each organization. So if you'd like to just pop your answers in the chat, we'll have a look at those in a few moments if anything comes in there. So what does strategic mean? And as I said, it can vary from organization to organization, but these are some of the things it could mean. So for example, business acumen. So knowing your business inside and out and the wider context in which it operates. So the factors that affect its success, not just your areas, but across the business. In order to be strategic, you need a solid understanding of your industry context, trends, and business drivers. It could mean future focus, knowing where your business is heading, how it wants to grow, and how you are contributing to that. About paying attention to organizational messages and continually aligning your workload, objectives, and messages to your team, translating them into what is meaningful for them. So if it's that, it's about the focus on new possibilities and long-term thinking further out. Then also having a point of view on important topics in your area. For example, 3 points on how to lead a hybrid team or 3 trends in your work area. This is about communicating strategically. You've done the thinking, so you have your mini script prepared and your points ready. Strategic thinking should reflect multiple viewpoints, not just your own. So it shows that you have read and interpreted information, considered the wider business beyond your work area, and demonstrated a point of view. And we do talk about this in the program. We have group discussion around this. So the first part really is getting really clear about what being strategic means in your organization. And it could be one or a combination of these things that we just mentioned here. So what can get in the way of being strategic? Well, we're going to run a poll in a moment just to see what resonates with you. But what are the headwinds to being strategic? Well, what we see is the first one, which is drowning in execution. So if you're someone who really wants to get the job done, we often say, give it to me, I'll do it, I'll get it done. And then we get more and more and more to do. And it's a vicious cycle, and your job grows and grows. It's a good idea to have a job laundry, a clear out essentially, to consider what your role really is and your purpose. What am I here to do? How do I add the most value? And be ruthless and focused. Multitasking is another barrier, potentially. Studies have shown that women are generally better at multitasking and do it more often. Most of us are proud of this. We use it to our advantage. The challenge is that multitasking actually leads to less productivity, quality of performance, and poorer well-being. So it causes us to become distracted and overwhelmed. It can reinforce the frenzy of being tactical and even scattered in our communications. We're on this hamster wheel and we're not looking up at the big picture. And control. Are you someone who tends to take more control of tasks and care more about how and when it gets done? And to what level of quality rather than fully delegating? And do you have high empathy and feel guilty about asking everyone to help when you're busy? Are you saying to yourself, they're too busy, so I guess I'll just do it myself? And then the final one is avoiding risk. And whether it's going out on a limb with an untested idea, speaking up in a meeting, or taking on roles we don't feel perfectly prepared for, are you too cautious? Research indicates that if a job or opportunity is offered, women won't apply or put themselves forward unless they feel they can do 100% of it. Men will go for it if they feel they can do 50 to 60%. So this means we may be missing out. We will often only take the risk if we feel really comfortable. So Dio, if you wouldn't mind, please, if you could run the poll there to see what resonates with people here in relation to those barriers to being strategic. So drowning execution, stuck in the daily grind, 75%. Yeah, multitasking, right up there as well. Keeping tight control, believe it's faster or better to do it yourself. Okay, so for this group, drowning execution and multitasking really resonate here, and avoiding risk is one that is quite strong here as well. And in terms of what being strategic means, I see Mary said keeping the bigger picture in mind and changing focus based on what the business needs. This is really resonating for me, balancing the enjoyment of seeing a job actually getting done versus the satisfaction of influencing direction. Yeah, that's really interesting. Absolutely. I suppose for me, one of the things would be battling execution. So really wanting to get stuff done. And for me, I guess I just have to come to terms with the fact that I'm never going to get my to-do list done. But knowing that I prioritize and I get the main things done is good. Keeping in control as well can be something for me as well. So really I need to just let people help out and give them opportunities as well. So I think that's something that I work on too. There is a TED talk actually by Amy Cuddy about taking risks, and sometimes we're actually getting in our own way. And what she says is fake it till you believe it. So I think that's a really good point to actually fake it till you believe it. So this is on your worksheet, strategies for mitigating barriers to being strategic. And on the program, we do an activity. We put people into small groups and we ask which of these barriers challenge you. So we have a discussion around that. And we also then identify strategies for overcoming barriers to being strategic. And we then take a short break here. And then on the program, when we come back, we look at this, which is adding strategic value. So depending on the job you do or your level in the organization, not everything can be focused being strategic. So it's useful to consider what areas of your role could be strategic. So in the pre-work on the program, we ask people to consider in what ways are you adding your full strategic value? What does that mean for you in your role? And it could be some of these things. It could be being a translator of your organization's strategy so that people understand where the company is going and how they fit in. Prioritizing the focus of your team based on the strategy and changing that focus when necessary. Planning your team's work with a longer team focus. Delegating to ensure that work gets done so that you can focus on higher value activities. It could be developing your team as well as growing successors and future leaders and thinking about their development. It could be continuous improvement, ensuring the quality that is expected by your customers, your organization, and thinking ahead as to what needs to improve and change. And talking about change, refocusing the work led by changes based on the environment. Could be endorsing your team's work and its members upward in the organization by profiling the work and its importance to the strategy, and sharing valuable insights upward because you are closer to the pulse of the organization, customers and clients. So we're just going to take a look at one of these, which is the last one. And if you are comfortable, I just invite you to share your rating in the chat. So are you more tactical and just thinking of things when you are asked or under pressure, or are you sharing your insights proactively and sharing on a regular basis? Or are you in the middle, which will be a 3? And I'd encourage you to ask yourself as you move up in the organization, are you getting the balance right? So the challenge is that we often get stuck in a box and don't make the time to truly add our strategic value. And we focus too much on the tactical and execution, too much time working in the business and not enough time working on the business. So on the program, we have a breakout group here where we discuss adding strategic value. And you would have completed a self-assessment as part of the pre-work for this session. So we give participants time to review this and where they are focusing their attention. So I'd encourage you to tease out the work you are doing to be more on the strategic time. And we can get stuck in the inbox and often focus, as I mentioned, within the business, as opposed to focusing on the business. So I've mentioned it's important to keep a big picture perspective. Free yourself from execution. It's difficult to find time to think big picture when you're constantly task switching or if your day is packed with meetings. So if this is you, you're not alone. Up to 96% of leaders say time is the biggest roadblock to strategic thinking. And in the pre-work, we ask you to assess your current focus, whether it's high value work, which is strategic activities that you need to keep doing, low value work, which is work that adds little value or could potentially be done somewhere else, or new value work, which is strategic activities and yet you have little or no time for it. And low value work is actually sometimes referred to as NPT, which means non-promotable tasks. And you may have read the study, but the studies done by Harvard Business Review found that women volunteer for these non-promotable tasks more than men, that women are frequently asked to take on such tasks, and that when asked, they're more likely to say yes. So non-promotable tasks are those that benefit the organization, but likely don't contribute to someone's performance evaluation and career advancement. So these tasks include traditional office admin, housework, and a much wider set of tasks, germane roles such as filling in for a colleague, serving on a low-ranking committee, or taking on routine work that doesn't require much skill or produce much impact. And taking on too much of this can have serious consequences for women, because if they are disproportionately saddled with work that has little visibility or impact, it will take them much longer to advance their careers. And HBR studies demonstrated that although neither men nor women want to volunteer for thankless tasks, women volunteer more, are asked to volunteer more, and requests to volunteer and accept requests to volunteer more than men. So these differences do not appear to be a result of gender differences in preferences, but rather from a shared understanding that women will volunteer more than men. The solution is not necessarily for women to decline more work requests, which would present problems for organizations and hold repercussions for women, but instead ask for ways to distribute tasks more equitably. So these things are important, but everyone must take their fair share, and that's the key here, really, fair share. So if you always take the minutes or write up action, suggest everyone takes a turn. Because you're always doing that, you aren't able to contribute like everyone else at a meeting because you're too busy taking notes. So what are you not able to do when you're doing these extra things that could contribute to strategic value? So if you do determine that you are doing things that are not adding the right value, identify some strategies you can use. So first one is delete. So do you have a standing meeting that isn't achieving anything? Do you still generate a report that isn't required? Time to delete it and move on if that's the case. Delay. Are there things that you could delay to stay focused on other, more important work? Can you renegotiate project timelines when there are too many priorities at hand? Distribute. Could you distribute the work to someone who is better suited to it? Is there work you can outsource more effectively than doing it yourself? Or break down the tasks and delegate to help others' development? And diminish. And this can actually be the most valuable of all the strategies. Our work can snowball over time and get bigger and bigger and more cumbersome than it needs to be. So do you have a meeting that's grown to 2 hours when a half hour would do with concentrated effort? Is a report you write monthly that could be pared back to a more focused set of information? How can you get at the heart of what's required and reduce all the less valuable activities that have grown up around you? So regularly review your activities. As mentioned, do a job laundry, a clear out. Audit your schedule and look for meetings that you can eliminate or outsource. Take back control of your calendar. Blocking time off and creating better boundaries can be really helpful. It's really about ruthless prioritization and staying focused and asking yourself, what's the most important thing I need to accomplish in this role? And this is on your worksheet as something to think about and focus on after today's session. So here is the challenge. Even when we know that we should be focusing on it, it can be difficult to maintain that focus with new activities coming in all the time. It can be challenging to say no to all these because we don't want to seem harsh and not a team player and not supportive. And on the flip side, when you get things done, it can actually feel really good. But actually, are you contributing to your own success or someone else's? But the reality is that every time we say yes to something, we're effectively saying no to something else. So in this program, we talk about this, and this is actually a really powerful discussion about when saying yes is strategic and when saying no is strategic. So what situations make saying yes strategic? even when we have no time. And it could be when we've got something important to our customers, our strategy, when it will provide us with exposure, profile, or stretch opportunity. And when situations make saying no strategic, when it dilutes focus, or when we are unable to deliver on a promise, or it's clearly outside our scope. So on the programme, we ask participants to think about a time when they did or didn't say no, and we talk about what insights they had and what they need to think about going forward. As we have seen, saying no can be challenging, and how you say no can be important. So how do you say no? Well, an example that springs to mind is on a recent program we had with one person who shared how she's the only woman on a senior leadership team, and she always offers to take the notes, and she realized it was pigeonholing her into that doer role, but she felt trapped, and that it was now just expected of her, and everyone would sit down and look to her to take the notes. So she made a change, and at the next meeting, she started with she would prefer if note-taking could be rotated to enable her to concentrate on contributing more, and she would be happy to take a turn and share a meeting. So a small change with powerful impact, powerful for her contribution and how she is viewed in that meeting. So on the programme, this brings us up to lunch, and the activity before lunch is a walk and talk on how we can strengthen being strategic. We have an hour for lunch, and following this, just to let you know that we do aim to have speakers on the workshop, as women like to learn through hearing stories and experiences. So Sinead, who we introduced at the start of the session, is a regular speaker on our programmes. So Sinead, if you're ready, I just want to ask you a question. What do you think is important for speakers to share that benefits the participants?
Thank you, Sarah. And as I shared at the start, I am a graduate, having been on a Women in Leadership programme. And actually, it was our very pilot programme, and we had the most senior woman in our organisation attend as a guest speaker. And it felt amazing. It felt like a real elevation for us all to be surrounded by this wisdom. But the experience didn't match up, interestingly, because there wasn't this beautiful connection. And in fact, her journey to the top had seemed quite privileged. And, you know, the audience actually struggled to connect with the journey. And that left a real impact on me and helped us shape how we share the most impactful way to involve guest speakers. They don't have to be the most senior woman in the organization. It doesn't have to be led by job title. It's often the impact is that very term connection I shared, lived experience. And lived experience is typically somebody's ability to reflect on those headwinds that we all experience throughout our career journeys and share what they were and how they were overcome, and perhaps how they're still being worked through. I think the beauty of a guest speaker is that they connect the dots across.
Sinead, your sound has gone there. You may want to turn off your camera.
Here we are talking. Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me a little better now?
I can hear you now. Yes, perfect.
Yes, my
Thank you.
apologies, everybody. The connection does this for us from time to time, doesn't it? So, but I was just sharing that fundamentally, with the connection that women have, in these stories and the storytelling element of the guest speaking, it often connects the dots across the rest of the program, because even one element on strategic elevation is often dependent on self-confidence, on resilience, on an intentional focus on personal brand and advocacy. They all interlink. And I think the storytelling from a guest speaker really kind of elevates and brings that to life. And certainly, just to help with the bringing to life, before we kind of move through into talking a little bit more about strategic communication, I just wanted to share that, having that refresh of what Sarah was just sharing, I was reminded of one of my mentors and what she had said to me in the past, which was quite simply, Sinead, do less, be more. And it was super impactful, because I was definitely somebody who loved juggling And I share that because, you know, my story is that I've been a single mom, and I kind of, in a way, it's my identity, because by the time I turn up to work, I've run a million tasks and I'm already running in my busy, busy mode. Do less, be more. I was just in this mode of doing lots and lots, and that grabbed my attention. But it really impacted when I was on a business call with one of my colleagues who I hold in very high regard in the US. And she said, "Oh, Sinead, it's great to have time with you. I know how busy you are. You're always juggling so many things." And she actually made that statement of, if you want something done, give it to someone who's busy. And I thought, oh gosh, yes, but that's not how I want to be perceived. And it was super useful hearing that in the moment to make me think, gosh, I'm regarded as somebody who's busy, and I'm kind of a living embodiment of it. Yet, if I look at my personal brand and how I want to be perceived, that doesn't marry up. So I had to take the time to step back and think intentionally about some of the changes that I might have made. And some of the things that I did, for example, was simply to say, you know, when we start our virtual meetings, because they're the most common thing for us often these days, I start my little Teams meeting. I don't start with, how are you? I'm super busy. How are you? I'm busy. I'm busy. I really have made an
Sinead, your sound has gone again a little bit.
effort to Sarah. I've been listening to it. Thank you, Sarah.
No worries.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. I'll continue to persevere, but do let me know, Sarah, because I obviously am not getting any notifications about it. So
it's okay. I've turned my camera off too, so that should help.
See if it helps. Okay, apologies, everyone. But I was just going to share that my switch from entering a meeting and saying, you know, I'm really busy, was a very gentle nudge initially, was to start a meeting with just immediately going into sharing something that I'd heard or something. So for example, I would start a meeting and say, gosh, I just wanted to share this really interesting podcast. It had our CEO in it, and she was sharing X, Y, and Z. And isn't that interesting? So it helped me navigate my initial greeting. That's something that women are very good at, wanting to create a connection, especially in our virtual meetings. And it helped me kind of elevate my profile away from being busy into somebody who I was very keen to be perceived as somebody who is operating in a slightly more strategic way. So that's just a very gentle example. And I think guest speakers have an abundance of these stories and weaved within their career journeys. And that's one of the reasons these resonate really well.
That's great. Thank you, Sinead. Just give me one moment.
No problem. And of course, therefore, that does lend me into thinking a little bit more about communicating strategically, which is a core area of this particular workshop module. And that's because one of my sort of most challenging observations, I think, for us on a gender basis is that women are extremely capable strategically, but they aren't always perceived to be strategic. And one of the fundamental challenges is in how we communicate our strategic thinking. So you may have developed all of this thinking about how do I articulate, and you've got these thoughts and you're exploring things, but are we resonating? Are we sharing? And another example where I bring this to life, if I'm doing a guest speaking piece, is that I went through a formal redeployment process. And during that redeployment process, because it was one of those sort of pulling jobs into one role, I went for a director role, a promotion role, and I was successful. And that felt great. And I remember the CEO at the time saying to me, Sinead, we had no idea we'd got somebody of your capability in the organization. And initially, I heard that as a compliment. And then I stepped back and realized, well, why? Why aren't I known as somebody who is capable at a director level? And actually, a lot of the time, that really is just a formal process allows you to formally.
Sinead, your sound just went there again. You want to come back?
Structure impact of thinking, and our role was impact. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, you're back.
So can you hear me, Sarah? Sorry.
Yes, we can. No worries, Sinead. Yeah, keep going. You're fine.
Sarah, if you need to pick up from me at any point because it's disruptive, you let me know, because of course
No worries
I'm hearing me fine. But what I was going to share is that, you know, I went through that redeployment process 7 years ago and haven't done it since. And therefore, if I only once in 7 years took the opportunity to articulate strategically because I was in a formal process, well, isn't that a tragedy? So that, again, is an example of a story that might be told in guest speaking, but actually within these communities of women that come together to learn in this way, these are other examples that are brought to life that can kind of catch us and think, of course, how is this landing? How am I perceived? Interestingly, we take some time to just acknowledge and put some robustness to this that says, fundamentally, men and women do use different language and approach to conversations. And this is backed up by linguistic experts, sociologists, anthropologists. There is a difference. That's important because I think it's not just about fix thyself or that it's just you in your particular circumstance. There are some fundamental differences. This is a real headwind. So we acknowledge that before starting to look at what are some of these differences. Now, I invite you to comment on this as well, but certainly this is research-based, and hopefully this will jump out at you a little bit as you're looking at the screen. But men and women have very different natural speaking styles. So men are naturally more assertive, speak up, interrupt more often. Women are typically more expressive, tentative, polite, and speak up much less often, which in particular happens if they're in a minority, so in an environment where there are more men or in a hierarchical situation. Men often use I rather than we, which tends to be something that's led by women as a language positioning. And I'm sure that will resonate with you all, and in particular for anybody who attended our session around leading with personal vision, where we touched on, you know, your advocacy and how do we celebrate ourselves, and women will typically celebrate being part of as opposed to I did. Men will often downplay their doubt by making confident sounding statements, whereas women downplay their certainty by using qualifiers and making statements that sound like questions. So women will often, you know, say things like,
Sinead's sound just went off there again for a moment. Apologies.
don't you think, if you do that and pause and invite you to do that? Connecting clearly. So this is just an example of differences, and it's okay that there are differences. We're not saying this is a bad thing. We're saying it's okay and it's societal, but we need to be aware of them. And I think it's a really useful thing to think about it in the context of a busy organization. We're all used to running at a very fast-paced, volatile, uncertain times. But in that, what voice gets heard more? What's the impact of those subtle differences? I'd argue, and certainly this is the positioning within this, that the impact, a subtle impact about maybe the confidence with which something's communicated, or the I versus the we, has an incredible ripple effect collectively. When we communicate strategically, one of the things as we go through this workshop is we break it down into thinking about language, delivery, and point of view. My own observation, having worked with participants in the past, is that language and delivery tends to be the focus, and certainly we wouldn't ignore those. But point of view is an interesting one that often gets missed, and therefore I just want to spend a little bit more time on that one today. But certainly language and delivery. If we think about language, Sarah, just on the next slide. One of the things, the language piece is actually really foundational, and it is a headwind, which is why we look at this. And I think it's a really important, when I was just saying about, think about the busy world of work in which we exist. As you look at your screen, instead of that column of language phrases, they are typically where we as women will go. And I don't believe it's just in the workplace, it is societal. How about, I tend to agree, you know, instead of this, try something more powerful, I strongly suggest. Now, interestingly, on language itself, this isn't just about the words. And I think this is one of the powerful things for me about the time we spend around this in our workshop environments with women. These words, when we go to articulate them, we often hold ourselves slightly, and obviously if my camera was on, I would do this for you, but we hold ourselves slightly taller as we move from a very kind of permissive to a statement. So how about to, I strongly suggest. We elevate our body language. And obviously if we think about communication, the words are often not body language, but for women, working on those words impacts tone and body language, which is why we take time on that. Thank you, Sarah. But as I said, point of view is a really interesting space that often gets overlooked when we work with women around this space. And point of view, so sorry, Sarah, if I just drop you back a slide just quickly to bring this one to life. I won't take too long on it, that's it here. But this is a really, just if you just read through yourselves as opposed to me taking you through it, starting with response one, I'll give you the context here. Just imagine you're at a talent review meeting and you're discussing the top talent in your teams and who to invest in the coming year. Your colleague has just finished praising someone in their team who's a highly technical expert. You feel an emotional reaction because you don't think this person should be considered high potential. These are the two responses. One is an opinion and one is a point of view. The very definition of an opinion is it's a judgment formed about something. It often starts with, in my view, I think, I feel really passionate, and women will typically gravitate towards this. Response two, which hopefully is quite clear, is a point of view, more of a perspective from which something is considered or evaluated, and typically less comfortable for women and more comfortable for men. But we do need to take the time to kind of really think about not how comfortable we are, but what's the impact? How am I perceived if I articulate with a point of view versus an opinion? And I would just share, you know, again, this is the sort of thing that comes up through having time for breakout groups, through having time for exploration, is that what I've heard is, you know, growing up in large families, often children are encouraged to navigate conflict, you know, family conflict and siblings by saying, well, in my opinion, and it allows somebody to air something, perhaps it's a different perspective, but it's often in a family, that's where a lot of that has come through. And a lot of girls in particular will grow up navigating family conflicts with, in my opinion. And that's just an example of where that is so sort of value set and normative, but not something we can ignore when we then think about our impact in the workplace and how we're perceived. Sarah, thank you. So just a sort of quick summary, really. So a point of view, and we take time, and as you can imagine, across all of this around the language and kind of how we're defining strategic communication, we take time to weight this to the group as appropriate. But this is an interesting one, thinking about how do you observe this in your work meetings and with your colleagues. Have a real lean in and listen, but point of view puts what you're saying into a broader context and connects the dots. Before you drop, it feels more objective or analysed, and therefore it elevates, which I guess is what we're saying, how we might take through and break it down as a working practice, an actual bring it to life, because actually these things aren't always something that are immediate. So we might connect with this and say that's logical, but changing a behaviour that, you know, to my suggestion, could be quite deeply set in kind of our formative years, because this isn't just something we learn in the workplace. This takes practice, and is doing this in a safe place with either the buddy or the wider groups, the breakout groups, can be a really nice way. So this is an example of how we would break this down and help women work this through. So for example, the question might be, how are we doing on our diversity strategy? And just take a moment, you know, where would you go responding? Because we're trying to elevate strategic communication. and actually sometimes to practice and change where we might go, not into the weeds. This model of reflect, connect, make choices, ask and listen is a really nice place to do it. Now, you're not going to go through that every time you do this, but practicing it within the environment, we really find this helps people really kind of think about that elevation, using strong words, getting the tone right, and then really taking the broader piece. Sarah, are you happy? Thank you. I was going to say, you know, when we work through this, I was just going to acknowledge that we do the reflection piece is the bit where you can build out your credibility of what you've done. So I have experience, expertise. The connection bit is you're saying why it's important. Then the piece about making choices is where we integrate feedback, observations, research, and then the listen. And I just want to just say that, you know, when we're doing, you know, we can do this, buddy, we can do this within the wider group. The questions piece, ask questions and listen. This is such an important space for women to take time. And I think really important because we often get messaged about be heard, elevate your voice. Sometimes being heard at its most impactful is asking great questions. And these might be really good strategic questions. So we might ruminate and worry a little bit sometimes about, am I inputting in the right way? Truly take the time to step back and ask questions can be how you're then perceived to be adding more strategic value. So taking time to prepare, think about where's the strategic direction? Is this having an impact? These are some of the things that can really then impact how you're perceived in your communication. So it's not just about volume of input. It's actually, that could be questioning. Sarah, just checking how I'm landing in terms of sound, because it's actually about thinking. Landing in terms of sound, because either tips.
Yeah, you dropped in and out slightly, but you were able, but we heard you, so you're all right. You can keep going.
Okay, well, I think probably if I conclude from this slide, Sarah, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This is a nice slide from a, admittedly, it's the top tips that seems to have cut off at 9. But I can read through. I know I've got another tip there, Sarah. But certainly the wider organizational goal, you know, this is something that some of us find easier than others, but it is such a beautiful practice of, am I doing something that impacts the direction of our business? I love that most women I connect with are really purposeful and care about what their organization does and the impact it has, and therefore really are very capable in this space. So take the time to keep your head and trust that. Don't operate in silos. So, you know, this bit about be resourceful. We have touched on networking before. One of my biggest challenges I've observed for my fellow women colleagues is that often they don't feel that they're going to be able to add value into the network from what they're asking. So almost like a quid pro quo, feel a bit nervous about reaching out. It doesn't have to be a network that's known in this day and age. We have so many social media resources. And back to my story about actually listen to podcasts. What's your CEO saying out there? And take the time to listen. That's worth listening into, because your ability to articulate and then think, how does what I'm doing hang to that? Or share, like I said, if you're trying to reframe from being busy, sharing how what you're doing, I listened to this and this made me think about. That's certainly one of the tactics I use, and that became quite an easy habit. Thinking further out, short term with longer term perspectives. Again, I think in this day and age, we don't need to go too long term because the world of work's changing, but know your roadmap, strategy, etc. And just take a little bit of time to lean into it. Prioritize, I guess, between that immediacy and thinking time. Review where you are with your strategic values. That's very similar, just in terms of connecting with that. And this bit about articulating well, okay, so this takes a little bit of practice, and I think this can often take a bit more preparation for women to learn a new habit, and that's often all this is. It's habitual. So just taking time with it. And then thinking ahead, this is reinforcing, can help you display confidence. Confidence, think builds momentum, confidence, the more self-worth. It's kind of a perpetual ripple effect. So I definitely celebrate thinking of ways where you can create, maybe even go outside of your comfort zone, but then have a great experience that builds your confidence and build on your reputation. So again, finding there are so many opportunities in which we can demonstrate a lot of the strategic thinking that's already there. So just thinking about different ways, lean into others, hear what they're doing. Sometimes when we're thinking consciously and intentionally around the space, we're more observant of others, and we don't have to look to the top of the organization to see it. Not everybody wants to be at the top. So some of the brilliant leadership I see around me may not be at the most senior level, but the impact they're having on a business and the sense of self-worth they have can be quite magical to be around. There's a couple more points here, but the point missing that's just dropped off the bottom is lovely. Continue your learning, research resources, and build your broader network. That was the point that was just missing. And I think that's really important when it comes to strategic thinking, because it allows us to better articulate what's happening in our sector, our market, what's shifting, etc. So we can keep adding value in that way. Sarah, I'll pause. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sinead. Thanks for that. That was really, really valuable information. So thank you so much. I didn't want to stop you because the information was really useful. So thank you for persevering with your internet. So we'll be wrapping up the day in the workshop here, and we'll be sending everyone away with their buddy. And we are really coming to the end of the program here. So at the last discovery session, everyone shares their leadership vision, how they want to thrive as a leader going forward. And this is usually really inspiring, and how to maintain a connection with their body and sustain learning and keep actively learning. So at the last discovery session, everyone shares their leadership vision, as I said, which is really, really interesting. We invite managers as well to the final session so participants can share what they've learned. All participants on our eWell programs, once they finish, are invited to join our closed LinkedIn group, where we post regular thought pieces and arrange an annual virtual networking event to keep the learning alive. And I know we can't have a graduation session here today, but it would be great if you could share something you learned on these sessions with another woman. And we would love this to have a ripple effect to help and inspire other women. So I hope that this has given you a flavour of how we deliver our programmes, as well as started your own thinking. And I'd encourage you to reflect on what being strategic means to you and your organisation, your goal for being strategic and working at the right level, and how you communicate strategically to make your thinking visible. And I'd like to thank you for joining us over the last number of weeks, or whether you're able to join 1 or 2 or 3 webinars. It's really fantastic. Everybody who has registered to attend these sessions will receive the recording. So don't worry if you weren't able to attend all of them. We've really enjoyed having you. We hope this helped you become aware of and being able to maybe remove some of the headwinds that might have been getting in your way of your career progression. Sinead and I are going to hang around for about 5 minutes. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat or the Q&A. If you're leaving us now, thank you so much for your attention. And if you do have any questions, please contact us by email at ewill@lhh.com. Thank you so much. And there's just a little poll there. Apologies if you wouldn't mind just filling that out. Thank you so much. Okay, so no questions there. So I think we're going to leave it there. So thank you so much, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. And thank you so much, Sinead, and thank you, Dio, for producing the session for us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Dio.